Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Rebecca. And welcome, everybody. My name is Vincent. I am a founding engineer and product director here at Snorkel AI. And I couldn't be more excited to be here with you today talking to Joe Spisak from Meta about accelerating production-ready AI. As we go along, please be sure to post your questions to the Zoom Q&A chat and don't miss the live panel at the end of this summit. Overall, Snorkel is super honored and humbled to be a part of the Llama ecosystem, and Joe is a leader at Meta who has spearheaded that effort over there. Welcome to Joe. So great to be with you. And super cool to hear that you were a Zamboni driver in grad school. That is an honor that I envy significantly.
Great to be here, Vincent. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, I'll kick us off a bit then. You know, a lot of what we think about here at Snorkel is bringing high value production AI to the enterprise. And as a result of that, we think a lot about where the puck is going in terms of how people are thinking about building AI. Some of the things that have become clear to us: one, quality matters, right? When it comes to enterprise use cases, we're seeing that, frankly, a lot of the off the shelf just prompt it use cases are frankly not enough to get to the high quality you need to actually ship to production. Cost matters also, right? A lot of the times the per token inference costs that you see in a lot of these closed AI models end up being quite insurmountable for certain startups or organizations who just want to put these models into production to power some of their most high traffic or high volume use cases. And at the end of the day, what we're finding is that organizations are starting to anchor towards lots of specialist models, right, where expertise and domain-specific adaptation is needed. And so a lot of what we believe and think about at Snorkel is twofold, right? One is that we believe in a future where there's actually many AIs aligned to specific organizations or individuals' goals, not singular closed AIs that are managed by organizations that folks don't have governance over. And two, we believe that the way that you actually customize and build and adapt these models is via the data. We think that the data is the only interface to actually programming these types of models. And I think a lot of that ends up coming down to the ecosystem that we are super excited to be a part of. We'd love to hear from your perspective, Joe, with your lens on the open source community. How are you thinking about the role of Llama, open source, and actually advancing our field and community, given what you've seen enterprises actually value at the end of the day?
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think with your preamble, I think data is so important, and I mean I see it firsthand, obviously, as a company, as the product and the products we're building, and obviously how we train our models. And I guess I've personally been in and around open source for I guess nearly a decade now, and I had this whole like other shadow career in the video space, and as a VLSI designer and kind of an engineer in semiconductor, and then flipped the switch over to AI, and it was and I think what drew me into it was open source. I think the fact that there was just such a powerful community that was forming around this, and it was such an open community. And what's like interesting for me is like historically, the community has kind of gravitated towards these really interesting, kind of gnarly, high entropy problems, and that's kind of like basically brought the best, brightest, and kind of the broadest set of folks together, like globally, to work on these things. And I think we're kind of seeing that firsthand with generative AI. Like some of the problems that Gen AI has presented, I mean, we fundamentally don't have the answers to yet. Like, for example, how do you evaluate a model?
Right.
It's such a new world for when things get subjective. Like we used to be able to have a ground truth, and like ground truth is actually really elusive in this generative AI space. So I can't think of a better way, frankly, than to advance the field through a community-centric approach. If you look at kind of everything that I've done personally in my career and even today, from all the way down to the compiler stack, through to PyTorch and helping to lead that for almost 5 years, to trying to basically create interoperability between models with Onyx, and then obviously working with partners like Apple and Google and Microsoft and a lot of others on building tools and ML ops and so on. There's no shortage of passion and I would say energy that the open source community brings. And so I can't imagine like doing this work in a closed environment. We just wouldn't get the number of smart people like looking at these things that would impact safety, that would impact how we responsibly build these things, just the diversity of ideas and things that we get from having such a broad ecosystem. You just wouldn't get that in a closed environment.
One, really, really appreciate and admire all the effort you've put in, Joe, even personally, right, to advance the field, open source in general in the last, decade plus, right, of your efforts, especially in AI ML. I also couldn't agree more with the idea that, a lot of what building safe, effective, useful AI is going to look like is actually injecting that expertise, injecting that knowledge and injecting, methods that only apply to the diversity of people who are actually trying to use AI. So, developing it in that open way feels like a prerequisite, right? To bring all those pieces together and make sure we meet the objectives of not just, a small group of people, but, everyone who AI has the opportunity to impact. So appreciate all the work. It feels like we're just beginning here. And yeah, a lot of that resonates a bunch. Yeah. I think one of the things that I think a lot about now, Snorkel began as an open source project as well. And through open source, we were able to reach a number of high value use cases and personas that, frankly, as data scientists initially, we maybe wouldn't have been able to empathize with. Mm-hmm. What kind of lessons have you learned building with real users, real enterprises who are trying to take these types of models to production?
Yeah, it's a really, if I look back, Llama, like the original Llama 1 was released in February. It was a non-commercially licensed model. And, you saw like a lot of research adoption, obviously. And then the big gap there was commercial adoption or commercial usage and having a license that was, that allowed that. And that's, in mid-July, that's where Llama 2 came in. And I think like the biggest lesson or biggest maybe observation I've had is just how fast enterprise has moved. Like I used to think enterprise is kind of this, slow and kind of very cautious space. But if you look at from mid-July to fast forward to really Connect when we announced some things back about 3 weeks ago at our major event, we've had thousands of enterprise start adopting open models and Llama models, Llama 2 specifically. And I think, the exact number that we published at that time, which has actually grown significantly, but that was, from Amazon and Google told us, over 3,500 enterprises have started projects on Llama 2. And, we did have some of those folks on stage, like Shopify and Reliance Jio, and we talked about Orange, using Llama in products. But just think about, a couple of months from an open model getting released to actual enterprise products and platforms getting shipped is just mind-blowing. And I think you couple that with the enterprise, a couple enterprise with the startup adoption. I mean, I don't talk to every startup on the planet. I talk to a lot of them, and angel and so on. But every VC I talked to said that Llama is just a lifeline that we've thrown the startup ecosystem, and now they're using it as a foundational element of the products they're building. And so to answer your question directly, my biggest lesson is really to not underestimate, the enterprise world and how quickly they can kind of consume and, really adopt open source, from obviously the tools, but also now models when they're really motivated. So it's pretty much mind blowing for me how quickly things have moved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the open source community has really accelerated just in general accessibility to getting started with and customizing and just trying cool stuff on top of these LLMs. I think Llama being the obvious leader there. One of the things that I've also noticed on your note of how quickly things have happened, some of our partners have mentioned this in the past, but we feel like the world is moving from a build then validate perspective to a validate then build world where, again, companies are starting to just try things out, hack, prototype things, and then try to take these to production. And what that means is actually we're seeing that a lot of folks who frankly didn't feel like they could participate in this process are actually getting involved way, way, way earlier. And a lot of that is just lowering the bar and increasing the excitement around what's possible for AI. So really resonate with what you mentioned. I think that's really pervasive across the enterprise that we've seen as well.
Yeah, I think I mean, to add to what you said, I think, the barriers have never been lower
Yep.
to using this technology. I like to joke around that, we're finally vindicated in the model zoo being kind of a great abstraction.
Right. Right.
Talking about, we built a model zoo in cafe, like, almost whatever, 9 years ago, and we thought it would be cool and people would use the models, but no one really used the models.
Right.
I kind of painted a rosy picture of enterprise adopting these models, but there is a negative side to this. I think, to your point about velocity, uh, not a lot of these companies, I think, have like really great ways to evaluate these models, for their applications. There's still, I would say, kind of a dearth of just great eval platforms. And of course, we talked about like eval is one of those areas of high entropy, and we do kind of basic things. I mean, if you look on like the Open LLM, like I don't know how great like those benchmarks are a proxy for an actual good product deployment. Probably not, right? I mean, they're pretty
Right.
they're not great benchmarks, I guess. They're pretty low level, I guess, or not very sophisticated in a lot of ways. So what I actually see, unfortunately, is like a lot of enterprises, kind of YOLOing models into production, and
Right.
it's a
Right.
little scary. I think though that
Yes.
we're going to start to see safety become a first class citizen again, and like that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and something I'm passionate about, and I'm going to be driving open initiatives around that personally, with Llama and our ecosystem. So I think between safety and I guess things like data lineage, like none of those models that you see that are in the open right now have a nice little lineage graph that shows, what data they've been trained on or fine-tuned on. And so there's a lot of things that I think that I'm worried about in the space, but like I think we have a lot on the way, I think, as a community that can help there.
That resonates with me a bunch. I mean, one of the perspectives that we often take on, and that, I think we're fortunate to work with customers who have the maturity to say, whoa, like, let's not ship this, if we're a financial services company, let's not ship this production right away and affect our, hundreds of millions of users with possible hallucinations, right? Without truly vetting and having the right governance for these types of models. A lot of what we're seeing in terms of how folks have been trying to make sense of evaluation and actually managing the safety of these models is, again, it kind of starts with looking at the data, right? It seems boring, but a lot of the capabilities also that are near and dear to me, right, that we're building on our roadmap are all around what are the slices of data that are going to be mission critical, right, and production critical for us to get right. Often those are a lower subset or a smaller part of the distribution that are often underrepresented when it comes to training, right? And so actually identifying, monitoring, and tracking performance over those slices ends up being a really, really critical and hard step, right? Finding those error modes ends up being quite nuanced because, as you said, we're out of the mode of just ground truth is a yes or no or kind of strict exact match type of answer. Those types of evaluation tools to us come down to that intersection of where in your data set are those hotspots and how do you actually inject the expertise needed to define what good looks like, right? The actual spec, as product people, right? The actual spec of what good looks like, I think it's super non-trivial to define these days. And I think giving people the right tools to people, not just people, but subject matter experts, the right tools to define those parts of the stack, something I care a lot about as well. So that really resonates what you mentioned. I know that you guys over at Meta too have been working on a number of adapted models like Code Llama. So you've seen these challenges firsthand. What are some of the lessons you've actually put into play around evaluation, curation, development that you think the audience would be interested in hearing?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Code Llama is a derivative of Llama 2. So it's kind of further fine-tuned on additional, code and frankly, language around code, because you can converse with it, and ask it about code or actually generate code, of course. It was a team and fair. So our kind of fundamental AI research team, took our foundation model and further fine-tuned it and developed Code Llama, and then we released it. It's kind of like, we started an org, myself and Kim Hazelwood and a few folks, yeah, almost 2 years ago now. We started an org internally around large model scaling, and this was our vision, right? Our vision was that we would get these kind of outcomes where we're building these big models that people could then build on top of and like kind of further innovate in different domains. And we're starting to see that, which is really cool. And it's kind of very analogous to like what Google's doing with Gemini and how they're seeing kind of a bunch of different domains get adapted on top of the foundation. So, but like I'd say more generally, like data curation, licensing, like privacy reviews, like it's not just like curating data and cleaning it. There's like we spend an enormous amount of time thinking about data, like and I think that's there's a lot of data that is it's not a deterministic thing. Like if I if I like increase, for example, like something in my data mixture in pre-training, like it's not always going to improve the things that I wanted to improve, like an eval. And this goes back to our eval conversation because like
right.
data and eval basically go hand in hand, right?
Yep.
If you have to adjust your eval depending on what type of data is in your data mixture. So I think model quality is it's just not this deterministic thing. And I think it can be like sometimes good and sometimes bad. Like I think in like what we've seen is like in good ways, like adding more code to your data mixture, like we see that like improve your model's reasoning, which is cool. Like it actually will follow instructions better and like it will, give you like really nice like kind of thought responses and it'll just improve that. But like what we've also seen is like just throwing like trillions and trillions of more language tokens at the model always like doesn't always improve performance either. Like it will, saturate and these benchmarks don't always capture, how well. So you may not, so this is why you tend to see like models that maybe don't perform as well on like open LLM leaderboard, but in actual practice and like qualitative practice, they actually perform much better than other models. It's just this is one of those things we need to figure out how to evaluate these models more clearly. And so we're still very much, in my opinion, like in kind of the art versus science phase
Right.
of this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with a bunch of your points, right? I resonate deeply with this. You said earlier this notion of what I like to call the whack-a-mole problem that we see today, right? You train on one subset and then another one goes down. And like, how do you actually, make it more of a science rather than an art where you can deterministically hill climb performance rather than just whack-a-moling different slices that seem to never be quite right. What's interesting through all that, and would love your take here too, is that what feels robust, at least from our perspective, is the fact that, defining the problem, defining the spec, actually injecting human knowledge and expertise in some sort of thoughtful way, right? The actual way and mechanism you do that is changing, of course. But that piece has felt, robust in terms of how necessary it is to just, align our models towards our own preferences and objectives. But
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm to be honest, I'm a lot more hopeful than I was, I would say, even a year ago on that front. I mean, I'm an investor in contextual AI, and that's a company. I think Dawe. I think he was at Stanford, and I'm hopeful not only because of the entrepreneurs that are working on it, but just because like things like RAG have come along, and
Right.
which is one of those things that I like to call like what's old is new again.
Yeah.
Like
Information retrieval. Yeah.
information retrieval is not a new thing. I mean, vector
Yeah.
databases are not a new thing, and similarity search is not a new thing. And so I'm really glad, when Ado called me up a couple of years ago and said, "Hey, I'm using FICE, Facebook AI similarity search in my startup, and I'm building on it in my product." I was like, "Hell yeah, this is great."
Yeah.
That project was mind-blowingly amazing, but no one ever used it. So I love seeing, stuff like that actually in the open source get leveraged and turn into something amazing. So but the fact that we're working, in these areas and we're building around models as platforms and augmenting them in this way, I mean, it gives me hope that, along with search and kind of other things, we can actually bring some semblance of ground truth to these models and actually, make them, maybe asymptotic to deterministic systems, I guess. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that's most of our time for today. So thank you so much, Joe, for a great discussion. I think a few top takeaways from my end. One, the world is changing at a really, really fast rate. But I think, the world is moving towards one where we think that democratization, leaning on the community and leaning on, a world where, hey, folks can actually take their own objectives, use cases and needs and inject that into the models we're building is going to be critical to move the field forward as a whole. And the way that that happens is with, an open choice of models, right, that you can inspect and look at, and also with, the data and tools to actually do evaluation, curation, labeling, at the end of the day. So when it comes down to it, right, I think, so thank you so much, Joe. Super fun to chat here and excited to do it again soon.
Likewise, super fun. Thanks for inviting me.